It means that light goes on. Okay. This whole program is about having that transformation in spirit, right? The whole program is about that. It's not about going, again, going to the wall, turning the light on. No, it's not about something like that. It's about that light in our brain, right? A light in our head. They even have I'm going to read something and it's pretty powerful, but, it made me think of the song. Things are so simple in this program. Did you ever hear this song? It's like this little old light of mine, right? So I never, again, what does that even mean? I used to have a guy and used to hear this stuff and he goes, what does that even mean? Matter of fact, I'll tell you a funny story. What happened was to show how we don't have any comprehension. We come in this program and we're just, to me, my thinking was crazy. I didn't know up from down. So the guy tells a story about he went to court. He was there he had two lawyers. He went there and he was in front of the judge. So the judge says to him, listen, say his name was Matt or whatever it was. He says, listen, Matt, next time you come back here and you drink and you come back, you're going to be in jail for 5 years. I'm letting you go now, but I'm going to put you in jail for 5 years. He kept on saying that. Understand, Matt? For 5 years. So Matt's walking out of the place with his two lawyers. He looks at his lawyers and he goes, what does it even mean by that? He didn't get the comprehension, right? The same with me, this whole program, right? This whole program, it talks about that spiritual awakening, that transformation, getting it, understanding it, turning that light on. And, the interesting thing is this. A lot of times we feel we have to wait for it. We have to wait maybe 10. They say after 5 years, you get your marbles. After 10 years, you learn how to use them. I'm telling you, in a moment of clarity, we read this stuff here, any sentence, and I'll read a little bit now. But if you listen with your heart and you get it into your brain, and it talks about on page 63 being reborn. Reborn could be an experience that happens, a sudden understanding and awakening, like Bill had in Bill's story. He had that God consciousness, and what it meant to him was it wasn't him anymore, right? Because Bill, let me just do one reading how Bill felt, and then what happened to him. If you go to page 14 in the big book, it says, okay, no, on page 8. Sorry, he starts off on page 8. He says, on the first paragraph, no words can tell of the loneliness and despair I found in the bitter morass of self-pity. Quicksand stretched all around me in all directions. I had met my match. I had been overwhelmed. Alcohol, I'll put the word food in there, or other compulsions, was my master. So here he was at what they call the jumping off point. He was ready. There's no hope, ready to kill himself. And yet he goes through on the next pages. He talks about the spiritual awakening. And he says in the next paragraph, here it goes. In the next paragraph on page 8, in the middle, it says, I was soon to be catapulted in what I like to call the fourth dimension of existence. So here we're talking about the light going on, right? And again, we're here listening, trying to intellectualize, going to a lot of meetings, but when we're quiet, we could go to 1,000 meetings, have 1,000 sponsees. We can, with the addictions, we could swear off, we're not going to have that drink, or we're not going to have that drug, or we're not going to eat that particular food. But we need that transformation. We need the transformation in spirit and understanding, because Bill, his whole life, if you read the beginning of Bill's story, was all about him and his taking control. He wanted to be the best golfer, the best finance person. He had all of these dreams, and it was all about self and self-will. But look where it got him. It got him off to the bitter morass and self-pity. At times during the day, hey, I find myself, and I'm sure listening here, you all would, we find ourselves in the point of being upset, irritable, restless, and discontent, they call it in our book, right? Because why? And because the self, right? So the light came on when I realized that I and the self and my ego created the problem. So this was the spiritual awakening. And I only say this because Bill had a sudden, and he said, I was soon to be catapulted. And, when Ebby came in, Ebby was a changed man. And he said to Ebby, what happened? And Ebby just said, I got religion. That transformation, that way of philosophy of thinking. Because you know why? Our other thinking, before the light switch goes on, we're in the dark. it's the dark and it's not true. Again, in a doctor's opinion, he talks about knowing the true from the false. It's just not true. To be in negativity, to be depressed, to be anxious is related to the self. 10 people have 10 different opinions, and we look at life and we see it through the eyes of ourself and our five senses. And it talks about here being catapulted in the fourth dimension, or on page 85, it talks about that sixth sense. Has to do with our relationship to food, definitely, right? It's all about the touch and the feel and the taste, all of the five senses. But when we live on spiritual bread. And that reading I just had, I'll just read a few more here. Spiritual comfort surpasses all worldly delights and bodily pleasures, right? Alcohol, drugs, uh, food, all bodily pleasures. But it's telling us here again, when the light goes on, we could understand there's two of us. There's a human side and there's spiritual, and living through the bread of a higher power. I mean, spiritual bread. Let me see. So here's another quote: forsake this sorry world. So all my self-centeredness is related to my relationship to the sorry world, taking in the material and relying on the dependence on everything material, and has to do with my addiction. So again, we can't, the problem is that we try to resist it, but resistance is through the ego, through the self. My best thinking got me here. Again, going to the steps. Step one said I was powerless, right? It's telling me I'm powerless. Step two says, came to believe, as Bill did here, a higher power could restore me to sanity. And step three said, made a decision. At that point, we made a decision to turn our will and our lives over the care of God as we understood him. So here it is. Bill is talking about that when he says here about a power greater than himself could restore his sanity, that he was into catapulted. He was to know a new happiness, peace, right? So we have what's called, there's pleasure, right, in life. And those are the things, the material things like the food, the addictions to alcohol, getting people to like us, any kind of material thing, money, success, and all those things. And there's also the happiness, joy, and peace, and knowing the spiritual side of us. We were created in God's image to be happy, joyous, and free. There's no way about it. But we took self-will, run riot. But anyway, let me get to that. I got off on a tangent here with all this, but let me get to the reading. And what happened was I was testing my microphone out. So I picked up this book. It's from OA. It's called For Today. So again, I flipped through it like I did the other day when I put up this book here, the original text of the Overeaters Anonymous, and I found that story in there, Feminine Victory, which was a woman, Florence, who came today. And I suggested you read that. It's unbelievable. A lot of stories that are in that aren't in, our new editions. They change the stories, but there's some powerful stories there. So anyway, let me read this. And on page 348, it says, and this is from Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found, was blind, but now I see. So that change in thinking to realize I was blind. And when I'm upset, I'm blind there too. I'm not seeing the reality of the real world. I'm not being honest with myself. I'm not seeing that I'm going from the self and the self-centeredness and making the world all about me, but having that spiritual awakening, to getting it. So we could be that. I mean, right here, right now. I mean, even if something is drastically bothering you, say here you're thinking of things your day or whatever, the answer I realize to my problems when I pray and meditate, as we do in this program, is to realize I have no problems. All these little plans and designs, because humility, we come from dust, we're going to dust. I mean, to be more, to understand that it's not about us. And we make it about us, we're playing God, right? We're playing a higher power. So we think we're omnipotent. We're the ones in charge. And when we do that, it's a disaster because we're not God and we're not a higher power. It says in the Bible, there's no way we could put another hair on our head or an inch on our stature. We can't. We're not in control. There's a higher power. We try to take control, and it ends up being self-will, and we end up being like Bill was. He was in the quicksand and morass, and So there's a way out of this moment right now. You can have that. But anyway, it says here. It says Amazing grace. This is what we're talking about. Having that light switch come in, God's grace coming into our life. It says here, for us, however, the experience is not a religious, but a spiritual one. So we're talking about spirituality here. And whatever our religious beliefs or non-beliefs, spiritual victory is felt as the profound inner change. Again, the profound inner change, being reborn, a dissolving of attitudes and opinions that kept us chained to the compulsions. So the problem is in here, okay? It's saying to the attitudes and thinkings that kept us changed. And if we go to page 25 in the big book, it says here, again, I always say this for some reason, and somebody figure out why. Why do you think they named this chapter There Is a Solution? Okay, so here we go. It says, under none of us, on page 25, almost none of us like self-searching, the leveling of our pride, the confession of shortcomings, which the process required for its successful consummation. Okay. But in the next part of it, it says a few sentences down, when therefore we were approached by those in whom the problem had been solved. Okay, so the problem, it says here, had been solved. If you solve a problem, you solve a problem. I had all, it says in this book, the answer to all my problems. I had all of these problems. Everything was a problem. I'm in the same situation I am now as I was then. I was miserable then, but now I'm happy. So the light came on and I started to read this book and do these steps. And step one alone says I'm powerless, what we're just talking about. That we have had, okay, so it says, there was nothing left for us to do. Again, we're at the jumping off point, the last block on the house. Bill was in quicksand, he was talking about. He said he saw no hope. He actually, he had to go to the first floor of his house because he was afraid he was going to jump out the window, and he even tried on the first floor, but it didn't work because he was so close to the ground. Okay, simple. There was nothing left for us to do but to pick up the simple kit of spiritual tools laid at our feet. Okay, it's very simple. This 12 steps. We have found much of heaven, and we have been rocketed. And we talk about that other dimension, the thinking change of existence, which we had not even dreamed. Right? Not even dreamed. Think of that phrase. The great fact is just this. It goes on to tell us, this is the instruction book, that we have had deep and effective spiritual experiences which have revolutionized our whole attitude towards life. Okay, so my attitude towards my addiction to food, to alcohol, to drugs, to people, had to be completely transformed and revolutionized. And it says, towards and the essential fact of our lives today is the absolutely certainty. Okay, the steps again. The answer is not me. I'm easing God out, but when I bring in the Creator has entered into our hearts and lives in a way which is indeed miraculous, he has commenced to accomplish those things for us which we can never do by ourselves. And it goes on to say there's no return through human aid. So let me just go back to this book here, and it says, this is really interesting, whatever our religious beliefs or non-beliefs, spiritual recovery is felt as profound inner change, right? The revolutionary change and transformation, a dissolving of the attitudes and opinions that kept us chained to compulsion. So when we think of our attitudes and opinions, my attitude was that everybody had to like me. My attitude was, if I had more money, if I had more food, this is joy and happiness. And I talk about the man who climbed Mount Everest. That's only called pleasure. We can have ecstatic joy and happiness, and it's meant to be that way because God created us that way. But we block it out with all of this thinking and the craziness. And, step two said we had to be restored to sanity. And it goes on, spiritual awake, and then it says, keep this chained to our compulsions. So chain talks about being in prison, being in slavery, being chained. And I told you a lecture I went to in this Maharishi, was a meditation lecture. He said, look, he goes, you can walk out of that prison right now. You can walk out of that prison if you want to, just by, meditating on, he talked about Buddha and God. It's our salvation, our refuge. And in terms they talked about the refuge. So, it could be a shepherd, right? We're just a sheep, but there's something intelligence, and we learn in here, and we agnostics that, we created by this higher way of thinking and consciousness. And the way I know is because when I try to do it on my own, it doesn't work. So there you go. I have the, how do you know there's such a thing as a God and a higher power? I heard a guy at a lecture, he was an atheist. So the guy comes up and he says, he disagreed with the atheist. He says, being reborn. I'm a real religious person. So, the guy's an atheist says, well, I don't believe in all this stuff. And so then the guy goes on to say, it says, well, look, my life has changed. My whole life has been unbelievable, and everything and people around me and the world has changed. My life has changed. And so then the guy who was moderating the meeting said to the guy who was the atheist trying to argue there's no higher power or God or whatever, he says, what more proof do you need? Right. So in my life, it's all right there in front of me. It just changed. That revolutionary change it talks about here, that perception, that amazing grace. And it says in that song, how blind I was, but now I see, right? How blind I was, but now I see. Okay. What a beautiful line. And I was lost, but now I'm found. Do you realize we're lost because that's where the misery, the depression, being upset, no joy and happiness is, because we got lost. We lost our way in the food. We lost our way in the addiction. We lost our way in money and people, success. Everything outside of us is momentary pleasure. The food is. But if you want internal happiness, it's giving us the answer here. So it goes on to say, spiritual awakening, the light went on, right? That's the topic. Healed us of self-willed blindness to the truth about ourselves and our condition. So the truth, how many times in this book and how it works is to talk about the truth. The truth will set you free. But in page 58, in how it works, 3 times it says the truth. I thought it meant giving the right change to somebody. I didn't know what it meant. Again, I didn't know it turning the light switch on or having this awakening. I always thought that, hey, if you did me wrong, I had to think about it, obsess about it, take the poison and hope you would die, or let you rent free space in my head for a few years or a week or whatever the time was. So that was my solution. That was my answer, coming from the self and the ego. I mean, I have a transformation now. I mean, and during the day when I do have those humanistic like thinking, I can go to this in one moment. I mean, reading something like this, or reading even this Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound, saved a wretch like me. I'm a wretch when I'm thinking of getting even, or resentment. This whole big book talks about. That's the whole problem, is resentment. That's what step 4 is all about. It's all our anger and upset, when you think about it, has to do with our relationship with people. But we have a higher consciousness now. It's not, the people aren't, what a way to live, letting people control your life like a puppet on a string, that if I see somebody and they look at me the wrong way, they say something that I'm going to be, I'm going to get upset. How insane I was. I'm going to go out and drink. I'm going to go out and binge eat. I'm going to go and kill myself, right? This is what we do because we don't have this spiritual awakening. We're in the self. We're in the human experience. We don't need it. We can walk out and be free men and women. We don't need to be chained and have people control us. But anyway, it goes on to say, we are no longer wandering alone and lost. We are found. Okay, this is that song Amazing Grace, right? So that people so deep in the clutches of compulsive illness can recover is truly evidence of amazing grace. So again, how do I know there's a higher power? In that guy in that lecture where the atheist was arguing, or agnostic, it talks about we agnostics, because you don't forget, I had faith. I had faith in a higher power. It was in people, success, things, all the material things. So who am I to say I didn't have faith when I had it all the time? But now I have a better way, this, thinking of a great outdoors, higher consciousness, it's just the spirit of the universe. It's just something that's there because, hey, let's face it, this, you can't figure out this whole universe. It's so miraculous and amazing, and it talks about, are we just coming from nowhere and going in nowhere? Read We Agnostics. That whole chapter explains. And by the time you're done, it's funny. I heard this guy on YouTube, and he goes, he says, AA is really a cult. He goes, he says, what happened was, he says, they told me to read We Agnostics. So I thought, hey, here's a chapter I could really relate to, we agnostics. And then he realizes that the chapter tries to tell him how to have a faith in a higher power. So that's what our program is all about. That's what the steps are. 9 out of 12 steps talks about a higher power. And how do we know it? There is one. I'll tell you, for me, like that guy said to the moderator said to the guy who didn't believe in God, he says, hey, this guy, there it is. The guy says it changed his life. So that's all I got to know is my life has been changed. And it's through this belief in something other than myself. So it is really truly amazing. And if we go on a page, okay, here we go. So on this same book that I picked up on page 350, it's called the For Today. It's a daily reader, and it's from December 15th, whatever that means. But it says, there's a quote here: "Don't fight your problem. Know there is a solution." So here it goes. This is what I always did. My whole life was about this. This is where I was into the self-centeredness, selfishness. That is the root of our troubles. Our troubles are of our own making. This is all on page 62. And then on the bottom page 62, it has a solution of a higher power. Read when you get a chance on page 62, read the last paragraph. And then I just have to read that. And if I'm upset during the day, if I wake up in fear or this or that, I just pick that book up. Now it's like almost automatic. I could read the first 2 sentences. Actually, to tell you the truth, I could read any sentence in the first part of this big book, any chapter, any paragraph, and it sets me straight for the day, realizing it's not about me. So anyway, when I fight or resist a problem, and the word I is here, it keeps on saying, I am actually giving it strength and weakening my chances of finding a solution. So how many times did I go to meetings and talk about my problems? Or you hear people in meetings, they talk about their spouse, their mother-in-law, they have all these issues and problems, but it only strengthened it because it made me realize it's real. It's only when I realized all of these things were fabrications. It says self-delusions on page 62, selfishness, self-delusion, self-pity, because 10 other people would have 10 different opinions. Again, like I always say, that anything outside of ourselves really isn't a reality. It's something that our mind filters and makes it whatever we think it is. That's the craziness. We were brought up by our parents and to be successful, to think this or think that. No, when we get centered, the answer is within us. Let me just see if I have this other page here. Probably not in front of me, but here it is here. Okay, here's a quote. Listen to this. I cannot tell you, this is referring to this author here, any spiritual truth that you don't already know. All I can do is remind you of what you have forgotten. What is that saying? It's saying the truth is here all the time, that the understanding, and it's going to talk about this here, about going to our sponsor, going to 10 people, asking them, what do I do about this problem? How can I do it? No, the ultimate thing is the answer is in here all the time. I tell you, my answer is usually I get centered and meditate, and I realize the answer to my problem is I have no problems, of course, most of the time, again, that quote, 99% of worry works because 99% of things I worry about never happen, right? So we're insane. We can't, and I told you that thing where a guy says, I can't trust he wakes up and looks in the mirror. He says, I can't trust that thought I just had. And then he goes, I have a second thought. I can't believe that either. Step 2 tells us that we're insane. But when we get centered, the answer is there. And, most of the time, my relationships in situations like that, or say I'm at work and the boss gets upset, or, it just, you start to realize the consciousness of tolerance, patience. It talks about this in that sick man prayer and throughout the book. The watchwords on page 118 in We the Wise. That's a beautiful chapter, and it talks about love, patience, and tolerance. That's what comes in. So having that consciousness, why would I just look at people as sick people? It tells that in the sick man prayer. If a person was in a hospital and they had I wouldn't be upset and went to visit them. I have compassion, love, and understanding if they were there, like with an illness or a broken leg or whatever it is. So anyway, it goes on to say here, okay, it says, when I fight or resist a problem, I'm giving it strength, like I just said. There is no problem. I'm fighting something. I'm making up my mind, right? If I think constructively about a problem, a course of action will present itself. What does it say in the 9-step promises? We will intuitively know how to handle our problems. The same with our addiction. When with the food, I'll intuitively, with God consciousness, you know, I'll do this a million times, till it sinks in. With God consciousness, right? I'll intuitively know. Do I want some goopy drink, 1,200 calories of sugar and salt, all that junk in it, synthetic stuff and the food and everything I have is one ingredient. That's all. I don't want all that man-made synthetic stuff. So it says here, is to know that a power greater than myself is directing me, and that power already has the answer. The answer is already there. We're creating God's image. We have this ultimate power, but we block it out, right? With all the defects of character, with the 7 deadly sins, the pride, the envy, the jealousy, gluttony, right? With all of these things, the more we get into our addictions, the more power we give to the ego, because the ego says, oh, I know what to do. I'll drink, right? I'll drink more and that will solve my problem. So we're looking for the answer outside of ourselves. And those addictions also, as you know, with the alcohol is devastating to the mind and the body. And all these stories, they end up in insane asylums. The same with the food. How many people are put away with that addiction too? So when we get centered, we'll know the answer. Okay, we can do things like 3 meals a day. We can have certain programs of dieting. That intuition comes from God. But the ultimate authority and the ultimate answer is the transformation. Because I said myself, I did that for a year. I was on a very strict program, but I was miserable every day. And it just came to the point where I finally said, look, I'm just not going to do this anymore. I'm so miserable. And the other thing too, with the weight, when we figure we got to get to a certain goal weight, it's like, even when we get there, if we don't transform our thinking, so we're struggling, we do it for a year, and all of a sudden we're at this perfect, what we think is a perfect weight. We hit our goal, and then all of a sudden it's a momentary thing. So then, like everything else, say, oh, that's not that important. So I'll, all right, I don't feel that much different. Not people running up to me thinking I'm so great because I lost that weight. So we didn't transform the thinking towards the addiction, towards life in general. It has to be a design for living, a transformation. And that's with this whole steps again. And I relate the story where somebody called me and said, hey, look, the things you're saying, I love it when you talk all about the food like you did one meeting. And I said, no, all you did was talk about the steps. I said, the solution is here. It's in this book. Okay, whatever the addiction is, it could be alcohol, food, so and it says on the bottom here, there is no problem I cannot take to God, and none of which God does not solve. So, this whole program, this whole book, this one, these other books, but they're all related to our big book. It's all in here. I think that sometimes I read this actually, I have the OA 12 and 12, and I do read from that to give it more of an emphasis on the particular addiction, but mainly it's all has to do with the big book. But there's one thing that I just reminded myself. It's called the 12 steps. They don't have a big book, but OA has a 12 and 12 book. And on page 10, to show you the insanity of our addiction, it says here, this is the things we go through and the things we do in life. Then horrified by what we were doing to ourselves with food, we became obsessed with diets. We spend hundreds of dollars on weight loss schemes, right? These billion-dollar industry out there. We bought all sorts of appetite control drugs. We went put ourselves on drugs. We joined diet clubs and spas. We had ourselves hypnotized and analyzed. We had major surgery on our digestive systems. We had our ears stapled or jaws wired shut. We did all this willingly. So here we go. So it's all self-will. How many things did I do in my life with the alcohol, the drug abuse, with trying to change my thinking towards my work or other situations in my life? I had all the self-help books in the world, the shelves full of them. It was to no avail because we need grace. We just said amazing grace. I mean, it doesn't say amazing diets. It doesn't say amazing self-help books. It doesn't say amazing discussing with our sponsor. It doesn't say amazing sharing. Right? Not that those things are bad, or maybe that's something we should do to understand, to understand, where we started, strength and hope and all of that. but we got to talk about the solution. You know, how many meetings and how many times do we hear somebody share, and it's maybe a 10-minute share and 9 minutes of it are about the problem. Maybe in the last minute says, oh, by the way, I did the steps. No, it's all about being in the solution, not the problem, because the problem we understand. We know the problem. The problem is us and our thinking. So the thing is that we can, and in the step 4 says, we when we write down our defects and it says what we did in a situation, it says look at them but don't glare at them. Okay. But also, interestingly enough, when it talks about, let me just mute the line a second here. Okay. There are 3 columns on page 65 in the big book. It doesn't go into the last, like in other places, there are more columns talking about, it talks about, well, we talk about our defects, right? And it's all based on self-centered fear. But then there's other columns that people put in where they talk about, well, we have to have love, tolerance, patience, and this and that. So what I do is, if I could find it here, let's see if I have it. Let me see. But anyway, because I can't really, it's not readily available. With the columns is I have all of those. I wrote this column out. Okay. The gluttony, the obsession, wanting resentment, the anger, the fear. And then I put maybe the people who was involved with all that. But in the last column, I have the word power. The other ones are no power and God or higher power consciousness. Because I can't, in my mind, I can't figure that out, whether it's this or that. But I know when I'm centered and I pray or meditate and do these steps, that all of that stuff comes to me, all of the positiveness, enjoying people, situations, enjoying life, and all these things about me. It just comes to me. It doesn't have to be something I have to micromanage. Well, okay, now I'm going to be loving. Now I'm going to be kind. Now I'm going to be this. You know, all of these things, it's just there. Okay. Because when I try, you know, it's like the story I talk about the centipede. Okay. The centipede's an insect and it has 100 legs. So another insect was going to race the centipede and he figured out an idea how he could win the race. What he said to the centipede was this. He says, look, I really, you have like 100 legs. And he goes, what I wanted to know is if you can, when we do this race, I know you're probably going to win the race, but I want to know how you manipulate and you do all of that, because maybe you'll help me. You know, I have 4 legs and I want to know, maybe you'll help me with the next race. And if I compete with somebody else. So the centipede says, I'll do that favor. He says, you know, centipede was confident he was going to win the race. And he says, yeah, okay, I'll let you know how I manipulate my legs. So it's the same thing I'm talking about when trying to figure things out. So the race started and the centipede started moving like this, right? Because, you know, it's just our lives. We try to figure these things out. We're so stuck on figuring out, we don't let the higher consciousness flow in. So the centipede knew what he had to do. But what he got blocked out. And that's what we do every day. We block ourselves out with the self-will. We can't function. If somebody says something to us, instead of when we're calm and centered, we don't have to get, you know, upset and angry. And then the answer will come to us. Will just be, you know, the best way to get even with somebody is to love them, right? So I mean, that's what happens when we're out of the self. When I'm in the self, I'm in fear, self-centered fear. It's all about the self. It's all related to fear. On page 65, it says there, it talks about that. But anyway, I don't know. So that's pretty much grace, right? Amazing grace. It's really true. It works. So the guy had a figure. He says, you see, there is a higher power. Look at what this guy said. It worked for him. And that's the way I got to leave it with. So it's definitely working in my life. So there is some truth to that. And that's that's it. I mean, it just works. Before it didn't. I tried everything for years. I tried. No, it doesn't come from self-will. Self-will run riot. So anyway, okay. So if anybody like to share now, just come right in.